We have a ton of news around Baldur's Gate 3, including people talking about cut content, how the game is unfinished, and Larian actually addressing it. So I want to go over what Larian has to say. I then want to talk about how this affects the perception of the game and its critical reception and all of the positive buzz surrounding it. And then at the end, I actually have some things to critique about the game as well. It's a meaty video. I will be keeping it spoiler-free. Hi, I'm Mug Thief. If the FBI asks, yes, that is my legal name. Let's get into it. So for those of you who don't know, there have been a lot of accusations that the game has cut content. Many of this comes from data mines that indicate that certain parts of the game were meant to be bigger, or there were more developed things, or just general stuff available that is not in the game that we play. There have also been some critiques from players, not about cut content, but just about Act 3 and how buggy it is, and specifically the epilogue. Larian has answered all of this in a blog post, which you have on screen, but if you're here, you probably want it summarized, which is what I'm going to do. They mentioned that they are going to continue working on the game. Primarily, they're going to focus on improving performance and a lot of the bugs. Now, it makes sense that a lot of the performance and bugs are concentrated in Act 3. Act 3 is pretty massive and a impressive technical achievement, and it was also not tested by hundreds of thousands of people like Act 1 was. Act 2 I think was quite solid, but still, definitely the game gets buggier the more you progress in it. And I knew that, and I think most people knew that would be the case, but it's Larian, and they always work hard to fix those things really fast. The bugs can be a bother and definitely affect people and stories, but I'm confident they'll be fixing it soon, and that's not where my critiques are going. Now, they talk about the user experience, and they mention the critiques about cut content and about the epilogues. They specifically say that a lot of what people think is cut content are just bugs, is the lack of reactivity and certain things triggering, especially in Act 3, which makes it feel a little bit more empty or like you're lacking interaction with some of your companions. But that those things are there and they will be fixed because of the bug fixes. When it comes to epilogues, they said that originally their epilogues were much longer for each character, but they decided to cut those back because it detracted from the epicness of the endgame. They then say that obviously people want something different. So they're going to be expanding on those epilogues, and the first one will be in patch 2, where we will get a new expanded Karlach epilogue, which was probably the one that was done the dirtiest in all of this, giving her the ending she deserves. So they're listening to player feedback and they are changing the epilogues. However, they mentioned that a lot of the datamined things that people are complaining about are things that were not intended to be in the game, and that they were cut in benefit of the game, because this is the experience they wanted. They kind of say that they've delayed the game so many times that it wouldn't have been a problem to continue delaying it to make those things a reality. Instead, it's because that wasn't the vision that they had for the game, which is understandable. We cannot ever confirm this to be true, but if we take them at face value, yeah, it makes sense. You want to deliver the best product, so some things are there, but they were never intended to be in the game. For me, the most important part is we're happy that Baldur's Gate 3 has resonated with a great many of you, but we'll never take that for granted. We're committed to tying up loose ends, fixing the remaining bugs, and improving things where we see they could and should be improved. So they'll keep fixing bugs, they'll keep making improvements like these epilogues, they will continue working on the game, and like I said, this is Larian. There will be a Baldur's Gate 3 Enhanced Edition, which is just all of the updates that they're going to put out finally rolled up into one, and that'll be great. So a lot of this bugginess and less polish that is in the later acts have led to people criticizing Baldur's Gate 3 and saying that, you know, it's not as perfect as people want to make it seem. It's not this glowing 97 on Metacritic. It's not Game of the Year. It's not the new standard. It has just as many problems as anything else. So I think that this is just like crazy exaggerations that make absolutely no sense. The buggiest portions of Baldur's Gate 3 at the end of it are still more polished, more enjoyable, and more feature complete than the grand majority of $60 games or $70 games that come out. So ignoring the fact that Larian has this post-launch support that they're very committed to and have proven in the past to be very committed to, the game as is still better. We have always had fantastic games that are incredible, despite having either cut content or certain areas that are not perfect or not as polished. Dark Souls will always be a classic, but Lost Izalith will still be there, no matter what. And the stories behind these things are sometimes things we will never be able to confirm or know completely. We can speculate. We can say that, of course, it's buggy. It wasn't an early access, or it's just very technically difficult, and the amount of decisions that lead up to all of the possibilities in Act 3 is what makes it buggy. We could say that maybe some of the ideas are things that they wanted to put in the game, but they were just so overly ambitious that it was not realistic. Maybe it was just cut to make a release date. We might know the story one day. All of them are interesting stories, but we've seen them all of the time. Like I said, why is Lost Izalith and Dark Souls as bad as it is? Was it because they didn't have time? Or was it because they had a plan for it and they just got frustrated and they said, hey, this is good enough, we can't do the thing we want? And Dark Souls, much like Baldur's Gate 3, is still excellent and an incredible product, despite those shortcomings. Now, I am not in the Larian and Baldur's Gate defense force. That is not part of my job. So I do think it would be great if these bugs and these epilogues and if everything had been released perfect. If the level of polish was just something that we've never seen before. Yeah, please, more of that. Yeah, that sounds great. But the reality is that even with those shortcomings, the game is that good. The game is that game. It's only going to get more polished and better from here, but that doesn't mean that where it's coming from was unacceptable or terrible or like, oh, how could this ever be Game of the Year? Have you seen Act 3? Sometimes something bugs out. I do the funny voice, but there are people whose experience has been more ruined by some of those bugs, and it sucks for them. I'm sure those are on the priority list though, because like those are serious things. Hope that doesn't happen to anybody else. And even then, like, these things happen in these sorts of RPGs, and the greatest ones have had these issues. This doesn't mean that now the game is bad. That narrative needs to stop. It's good, it's amazing, warts and all. The warts will be fixed later, and that's just a bonus. Now, however, I do want to add my own critique into this. I have negative things to say, not necessarily about the game itself or how it ends up being, but how I think I would prefer the game to be when it comes to its structure. So if you don't want to hear anything negative about Baldur's Gate 3, this is the moment to leave. Don't forget to subscribe. After my second playthrough, I got to really see things from a larger beat, from a different perspective. When you're playing through the game, it's this enormous adventure. But in my replay, I already knew my classes, I knew the gear that I was going to pick up, I knew all of the builds I was going for, and I knew all of the decisions that I wanted to change from my first playthrough. So it was a little bit more of a speed run. And when playing the game in that way, it's much easier in a more abstract, kind of zoomed out view to see all of the different story beats and the critical moments in it and how they're plotted out and planned for the player to see. And I think Act 3 should have been 2 acts. In my original review, I said that the game is continuously escalating in a way that I love. It's this classic feeling of starting from these small problems that hint to bigger things and then being in those bigger things. I might have liked a little bit of a different ending to be even more pushing that boundary of like god killers type of stuff, but it's fine. That's not really a problem. The problem is that Act 2 is, I think, the best one. It's very focused. It has a clear antagonist that is really engaging, that you want to fight, whose story and the stories around it are all very interesting. They're well distributed. The map is really cool and has a lot of its own stories to tell. And the way that that all ties into your party is really interesting. It feels very focused despite how much openness is available in Act 2. Act 3 is an incredibly ambitious thing. It's, I'm pretty sure, the biggest act. It's really big, even with the cut content. It's this enormous space with tons of quest lines where you reach the ending of most of the quest lines, but it just doesn't have the same level of focus, and I think that's a detriment to the game. Instead of having this one central thing that you're pursuing, and then there are other things that are supplemental or optional to it, you have one central objective, and then you have 4 other things all kind of vying for your attention that are all related amongst themselves to some degree, plus all of the side quests. So let's ignore the side quests and focus on those 4 things all working at the same time is tough. I don't feel like the antagonists in Act 3 have the same weight as the one from Act 2. Some of those main threads come from characters that have been with you all game, and those I think are pretty well done. But the 2 main antagonists that show up in Act 3 just, I feel like my attention was split between them. There was a lot of decisions to be made on what to do at some point within the main story that I thought was going to matter, but it doesn't really matter that much, it turns out. And they just don't feel as fleshed out as the bad guy from Act 2. And I don't think it's because they're not well written or have enough lore or backstory or interactions or involvement. I just think it's because it's split in a way that's not that cool. I understand that it's a really interesting thing to have both of those things happening at the same time and giving players the choice of just enormous freedom there in Act 3 of how many things you can go do and so many side quests and stories coming to an end. But maybe I would have preferred if each of those antagonists were the main focus of a chunk in a way that gave them more weight, especially because one of them, their true weight is kind of hidden behind an origin character. And I can't imagine how much less it would have mattered if that origin connection hadn't been there for me in my first playthrough. Does that mean that the game has cut content and that was the original plan? No, not at all. I'm just saying that that is my one complaint about the story, is I think I would have enjoyed it more if it were structured in that way. I mean, there's other nitpicks that we can have about decisions and branching and stuff like that, but come on. As much as I can make this critique right here, the story in Baldur's Gate 3 is just, I just love it, and I love my party, and I think it's some of the best characters really ever put into an RPG. So, you know, I'm just pointing out that as we reach Act 3, it just feels like a really, really big and ambitious thing, and it just isn't as tight as Act 1 and 2. A lot of people would say, well, Act 1 is going to be tight because people beta tested it for 3 years. I mean, I feel like Act 2 was really solid. I think it's more a decision than something like cut content or people not finishing things or like being pushed up and, oh, we have to cut this and do this way because we need to hit this release date. No, I think it feels to me more like that was an intentional decision, and that's it. So I'm glad. I'm very happy that they're going to be doing this. Anybody who says that because of these arguments and that, you know, now they're answering them and because of these things the game is not as good, or it's not game of the year, or it's not one of the best games of the year, or one of the best RPGs ever made, you're crazy. Of course it's one of the best things. Yes, of course it is. Just shut up. So that's the news and some of the opinions I had to give. If you liked this video, if you enjoyed it, go ahead and hit the like button. If you have anything else you want to add in the comments, please spoiler tag things. It was actually quite difficult for me to speak about all of this in a way that I hope people who have finished the game understand what I'm talking about, but without spoiling it for others. Do the same below. Spoiler tag anything, but I want to hear your opinions. If you don't have anything to comment about, comment for Vincent Algo, our good friend. I will continue to cover Baldur's Gate 3 and the news around it, and I do plan on doing a really big video about Baldur's Gate 3 later on. However, for the next couple of months, you can expect a lot of content from me about other games, a lot of indie games, about Starfield, about Lies of P, about Lords of the Fallen, and I know that most of you have watched me because of Baldur's Gate 3, but if you could come along with me for the journey, I hope to be making informative and entertaining content for all of these games, no matter what. If you want to support me on that journey, consider hitting the bell and turning on notifications. I promise that if I make a video, it's because I have something interesting to say about it, and coming along and supporting me throughout this YouTube adventure and hopefully making the channel grow and improving at everything that I do. I have a lot to improve at, by the way. I've been Muck Thief. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the internet.